My lips parted, but no sound escaped from deep within. My chest tightened as her voice, like venom, dripped from her lips. "You're too outdated for this role, Camille." The words sliced through the chilled air of the conference room, like shards of glass shattering with a crunch on marble. My name, my entire career, all reduced to an expiration date. Across the mahogany table sat Belle Halverson Wright in her perfectly tailored ivory blazer, lips painted a corporate shade of confidence. The CEO's daughter-in-law, 29 years old. 2 years ago, she couldn't tell a firewall from a fire drill. 8 months ago, I was assigned to train her, and now she was firing me. I sat frozen. The letter of termination lay between us like a final insult. 21 years. 2 decades of building this company's backbone, its predictive models, its encryption layers, its flagship Neuralink system, now valued at $710 million. That was supposed to be my legacy. Instead, I was being erased by someone who'd once asked me how to reset her password. Don't take this personally. We just need leaders who can keep up with innovation. Innovation. I'd been innovating while she was still color-coding her college planner. But Russell, CEO, Kingmaker, her father-in-law, wasn't here to watch the execution, of course. He always let his family do his dirty work. Somewhere in the pregnant silence, my phone buzzed in my bag. Probably another reminder from the hospital about Mom's bill. $14,000 past due. I'd paid off my student loans last spring. Thought I'd finally breathe. Thought wrong. Belle clicked her laptop shut, and that's when I saw it. Just before the lid closed, a slide deck titled Neuralink Demo Today. It hit like a sucker punch. They weren't just discarding me, they were stealing everything I'd built, parading it as hers. "HR will escort you out," she said sweetly, as if that made betrayal polite. As I stood, a voice from the hall, "Hey, check Slack." A ripple of laughter. Someone had posted a clip. Me, stiff in my chair. Belle, smiling like a conqueror. Caption: "Big changes at the top." My face burned with shame and fury. My throat locked. 21 years reduced to a meme. But behind the stinging pain, something colder flickered. I walked out without a word, holding one thought like a blade. They think I'm gone. They have no idea what I left buried in their foundation. The door closed behind me with a hush that felt louder than any slammed verdict. The walk of silence. My heels clicked against the marble floor. Each step echoed down the glass corridor like an accusation I couldn't answer. Heads turned, then whipped away. Averted eyes. Fake typing. Screens glowing like alibis. Slack was already humming. My phone buzzed in my hand, the notification slicing through the sterile silence. She's gone. 2 words. That's all it took to shrink 21 years into a whisper. I kept walking past the open plan pods where I'd mentored half these kids through late-night product sprints and caffeine meltdowns. Not one of them looked up. Loyalty, I realized, was just a line in the employee handbook. When I reached my desk, a corner near the east-facing windows, the world outside looked brutally bright. Morning sunlight bounced off the skyscrapers like nothing inside these walls had collapsed. My hands trembled as I pulled the small box HR left for me. Cardboard thin and impersonal, as if my entire life here could fit in a shoebox. I started with the obvious. Notebooks, badges, the pen set Russell gave me after the Series B funding close. Then my eyes landed on the photo frame, the one of Mom smiling in her garden before the oxygen tanks, before the hospital gowns. I picked it up slowly, thumb brushing over the glass. Just this morning, the hospital sent another reminder, balance overdue. 14,276. I thought this job was security. I thought I was safe. I forced the frame into the box and reached for the last folder in my drawer. A thick, worn envelope. When I slid it out, my breath caught. It was the IP assurance addendum. The very clause I fought for 3 years ago while the board rolled their eyes. The print was faint, but the words still burned. Any material leadership change requires co-signature from the primary system architect to maintain operational validity. A lifeline disguised as paperwork. Before I could process the weight of it, another Slack ping lit up my phone. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. A photo filled the screen. Belle, head tilted, lips curled into victory. Behind her, The Halverson logo glowed like a coronation banner. The caption read, "Leadership Shift for Innovation." Laughter emojis flooded the thread. My throat closed, bitterness flooding every vein. After everything, every midnight deployment, every investor pitch, they turned me into a headline joke. I pressed the envelope flat against my chest. The paper warm now from my grip. No one saw me walk out. Not really. They'd already erased me. But as I turned toward the elevator, one thought pulsed steady beneath the sting. They think this is the end. They have no idea what this clause can do. The memory file. The elevator hummed softly as it carried me down. But my mind wasn't in the present. It was 3 years ago, in this same building, when everything still felt possible. Neuralink wasn't a billion-dollar dream back then. It was a rough sketch on a whiteboard, lines of code tangled in my notebooks. I remember the day I presented it to the board, glass walls, polished smiles, and Russell Halverson at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone while I spoke. "Sounds ambitious," he said finally, without looking up. "But let's keep it lean, Camille. No over-engineering." That was Russell, always chasing speed over structure. But I knew what they didn't. The deeper the integration, the greater the risk if leadership ever changed hands. And in this company, power shifts faster than market trends. So, when legal drafted the development agreement, I added one line, just one. Any material leadership change requires co-signature from the primary system architect to maintain operational validity. The room barely noticed when I slid the addendum across the table. Russell signed between golf texts and calls with investors, his ink pen carving a future he didn't even read. I remember pressing my thumb against the embossed paper, feeling the weight of it not as revenge, but as responsibility. Back then, it wasn't about power. It was about protecting the integrity of what I built. Neuralink wasn't just software. It was 21 years of sleepless nights, failed prototypes, and everything I sacrificed, including pieces of myself. And now that single line of legal text was all that stood between them and a $710 million disaster. The thought burned like a bruise pressed too hard, because I never imagined using it like this. Not against them. Not like this. The elevator doors slid open. I stepped into the cold marble lobby and sank onto a bench, laptop balanced on my knees. My fingers hovered over the keys as I logged into my old inbox. Thank God they hadn't cut that yet. A flood of archived threads filled the screen. Contracts, sprint reviews, meeting invites. And then, like a whisper from the past, an email surfaced. Subject line, "Our confidence in you," from Armitage Capital, dated 2 years ago. "Camille, we trust your judgment on Neuralink. Whatever you decide, we'll back it." My throat tightened. They trusted me. Everyone did, until the family politics bled through. I closed the laptop slowly, a strange calm settling in my chest. It hurt to know what they took from me. But in the quiet, pride flickered like a hidden ember. They couldn't take what I built, or the power I buried in plain sight. The first crack. The door to my apartment clicked shut behind me at 10:02 a.m., sealing me inside a silence that felt heavier than the winter sky outside. The city beyond my window gleamed cold and metallic. December light sliced across frozen streets. People were rushing to offices, chasing futures I'd just been cut off from. I dropped my coat on the chair and sank onto the edge of the couch. Laptop perched on my knees like a lifeline I wasn't sure I deserved. For a long moment, I just stared at the black screen, chest tight, throat raw. 21 years gone in a single sentence. When the screen finally glowed, my inbox stared back at me like a vault of ghosts. Meetings, sprint reviews, system logs. But I didn't linger. My fingers moved with a muscle memory older than panic, typing in the URL for the compliance portal. The page loaded slowly, like it knew the weight of what I was about to confirm. And then it appeared. Status: IP assurance addendum active. Condition: co-signature required for deployment. I exhaled shakily, the sound catching in my throat like a sob. It was still there, my clause, the safety net they didn't even know existed for 3 years. It sat buried under legal jargon, quiet, invisible, waiting. But the relief barely settled before reality crashed back. My phone buzzed against the coffee table. Screen lighting up with a text from Leo, one of the few engineers I still trusted. Investors flying in at 4 p.m. Big Neuralink reveal 4 p.m. They weren't just moving forward, they were accelerating, racing toward a launch they couldn't finish without me. I imagined Belle in that glass conference room, rehearsing smiles for cameras, claiming innovation she didn't understand. The bitterness burned, but under it, something colder flickered awake. My gaze drifted to the hospital bill on the counter. Outstanding balance, $14,276. Mom's oxygen, her medications, the nurses who kept her alive. Every breath she took now rested on numbers I couldn't pay without this job. My throat tightened. But this time, it wasn't despair choking me, it was resolve. I turned back to the laptop, pulse steady now. I navigated deeper into the portal, and that's when the alert flashed red across the screen. Authorization pending. Expires in 8 hours. 8 hours. By 6:02 p.m., if no co-signature was logged, Neuralink's license would collapse. Everything would unravel clean, legal, irreversible. Pain ebbed like a tide, leaving steel in its wake. They thought firing me ended my story. But the clock had just started ticking, and I held the only key that mattered. The clock on my phone glowed 11:03 a.m. The countdown. I slipped into the corner booth of a cafe 2 blocks from my apartment. It was the same cafe where I'd worked through countless late nights for Halverson Dynamics, drafting models, fixing bugs, solving crises no one else could touch. Today, I sat alone with a lukewarm coffee and a quiet that felt almost surgical. Outside, snowflakes drifted like shredded paper from a torn-up script, scattering across the pavement. Inside, the world hummed softly, espresso machines, muted chatter, plates clinking. Life went on as if mine hadn't imploded 3 hours ago. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering before finally opening LinkedIn. The first post nearly blinded me with its glossy arrogance. Innovation showcased today at 5 p.m. The future of technology is here. Attached was a photo of Belle, radiant under the glow of studio lights, flanked by the words Neuralink, redefining connection. I stared at the image, my breath steady, my pulse almost eerily calm. They were racing toward 5 o'clock like victors charging a finish line, unaware it was a cliff because the system wouldn't wait for applause. It wouldn't bend for headlines or family names. It would obey the contract, the one truth they never cared to read. And that truth was simple. Without my co-signature, by 5:31 p.m., Neuralink's deployment license would self-destruct. No extensions, no appeals. I didn't need to write a single line of code or touch a single server. I just had to do nothing. The power in that thought settled over me like a second skin. Cool. Weightless. Absolute. For once, I wasn't the firefighter scrambling to save them. I was the fuse they didn't see. I scrolled past the applause in the comments, past the hashtag screaming innovation, leadership goals. My reflection stared back at me in the black glass of my screen. Tired eyes. Study now. A new email pinged at the top of my inbox. My breath caught when I saw the sender, Lorien Systems. Subject line, Camille. Let's talk. I opened it with hands that didn't shake. We've been following your work for years. Your leadership on Neuralink has set a new standard. If you're available, we'd like to discuss an executive role. A quiet laugh escaped me. Not bitter this time, but sharp with irony. The company that fired me for being outdated had just made me priceless. I locked my phone, leaned back in the booth, and let the hum of the cafe blur into white noise. The clock was ticking toward their big moment. They thought I was gone, but the real show, the one they'd never forget, was just 8 hours and 28 minutes away. The cracks widened. By 1:40 p.m., the cafe had emptied out, but I was still there. Same corner booth, same cold coffee, phone resting in my palm like a secret weapon. The LinkedIn feed had gone quiet for now, replaced by a new stream of notifications from Slack. Not my account, of course, that was long gone, but I still had access to a ghost login I'd built for system checks. One of those invisible safety nets no one ever bothered to remove. I tapped in, and the dashboard unfolded like a hidden theater. Public channels pulsed with energy, photos, videos, emoji storms. The innovation showcase had gone live internally. Belle stood in front of the giant LED wall, arms outstretched like a visionary in a tech documentary, haloed by the words, "Neuralink, the future is now." Her caption dripped confidence, proud to lead this milestone moment with our incredible team. Here's to breaking boundaries. And then, buried among the noise, a comment caught my eye. Can she even run the final test? No name, just curiosity laced with something sharper. Beneath it, someone replied with a winking emoji, like a joke told too close to the truth. My jaw tightened. For years, I carried this company through crises they didn't even know existed. Now, the same hands that steadied their chaos were scrolling through a feed that crowned her their savior. Another ping, a direct message this time. My breath stilled when I saw the name. Maya. One of the junior engineers I'd mentored from her first day. Wish she were here. This feels wrong. I stared at the words. Heat rising in my chest like a tide I couldn't hold back. Wrong. It was beyond wrong. It was theft dressed as innovation. Betrayal packaged as progress. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard, aching to type something, anything. To tell her the truth, to expose what Belle didn't know, what Russell never read. But I didn't. Not yet. Because the only message that mattered wasn't one I'd type. It was the one ticking quietly toward them, built into the bones of the system they thought they owned. As if on cue, the portal alert blinked at the top of my screen. Authorization pending. 3 hours remaining. 3 hours until the stage lights dimmed. Until the glossy captions turned to chaos. I closed Slack and slid the phone face down, palms pressed flat on the table to steady the storm brewing in me. The fury was real, raw, blistering. But so was the discipline. This wasn't about rage. It was about precision. And precision doesn't scream. It waits. The first call. The sun was bleeding into the city skyline when my phone vibrated across the cafe table at 4:07 p.m. The screen flashed a name I'd erased from my favorites months ago, Belle Halverson Wright. For a heartbeat, I just stared at it, watching her name stutter in white letters like a flare in the dark. Then I answered, voice steady as glass. Camille. Her words tumbled out jagged, breathless. The system. It won't authorize the final build. We've rebooted twice, tried every credential, nothing works. What did you do? I let the silence hang, savoring the tremor under her polished tone. It was the sound of certainty cracking. The sound of someone realizing the crown she stole was welded to a lock she couldn't open. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet enough to make her lean into the receiver. Read section 14, I said softly. A pause stretched taut and humming. What? The IP assurance addendum, I continued, every syllable like a scalpel. Leadership changes require co-signature from the primary architect for operational validity. That's me, Belle. It's always been me. Her breath hitched, a sharp, fractured sound, and for a moment I could almost see her face, the confident mask splitting down the middle. You can't do this. We have investors, cameras. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. You should have thought of that before you decided I was outdated. The line went dead quiet, just her shallow breathing threading through the static. Then she tried again, voice pitched higher, desperate now. Camille, please, just authorize it. Name your number. But before I could answer, another vibration pulsed through the phone. A new message sliding across the screen like a dagger dipped in irony from Russell Halverson himself. Fix this, Camille. Any price, any price. The same man who once told me to think lean, now offering blank checks to stop his empire from bleeding out on live broadcast. I didn't reply. Not to him. Not to her. Not yet. Instead, I ended the call and stared out the cafe window, watching the city glow like circuitry under a winter dusk. For the first time today, the air in my lungs didn't burn. It felt clean, sharp. Power wasn't a shout or a stage or a title etched on glass. Power was silence. Power was holding the key while they pounded on locked doors. And right now, I held every key that mattered. The cafe was darker now. Afternoon light bleeding. The fork, out as the city tilted toward dusk. My phone buzzed relentlessly across the table. Slack alerts, news pings, calls I refused to take. At 4:50 p.m., I gave in and opened one of the messages from Leo, investors in the boardroom. Bells sweating bullets. I could picture it vividly. The glass walls, the two bright lights, the investors with jaws clenched and pens poised like weapons. Belle, her perfect posture buckling, her voice cracking under the weight of a system she never understood. For a moment, the thought wasn't satisfying. It was suffocating, because beneath the cold anger, something softer pulsed, faces of the team I'd built. Maya, who messaged me earlier, wish you were here. Leo, always first in and last out. The engineers burning weekends to hit milestones. They didn't deserve to go down with her. My thumb hovered over the email draft I'd started an hour ago. Subject, authorization. Body, authorize now. One click and the system would unlock. The showcase would happen. Jobs would stay safe. The investors would cheer. My reflection stared back at me in the black glass of the screen. Eyes ringed in fatigue, jaw locked in indecision. Then another buzz fractured the silence. Another message from Belle. I opened it without thinking. Thanks for nothing. Good riddance. The words hit like ice water, stripping the last remnants of hesitation from my bones. She hadn't learned. She hadn't broken. She still thought I was disposable, even as her empire burned behind her. I stared at the draft one last time, then pressed and held until the delete bar swallowed every word. My thumb didn't tremble. The phone slipped from my hand and landed on the table with a soft thud. For the first time since 9:04 this morning, I inhaled without pain clawing at my ribs. A different email notification glowed at the top of the screen. Lorien Systems. The subject line was the same as before. We've been following your work. This time, I opened it. My fingers typed a single line in reply. Each letter like a step towards something cleaner, sharper. Mine. When can we talk? Send. The hum of the cafe returned, distant and soft, as if the world outside was finally catching up to the storm I'd survived. Pain had dragged me to the edge, but resolve pulled me back stronger. And now I wasn't saving anyone but myself. The cafe clock struck 5:31 p.m. The collapse. Like a quiet drumbeat, almost lost beneath the low hum of evening traffic. Outside, the city glowed gold, unaware that somewhere an empire was seconds from crumbling. I refreshed the compliance portal one last time. The screen blinked, then bled red across the top. Neuralink license voided. All associated vendor agreements terminated. No fireworks, no alarms, just a sterile notice on a white screen. Yet it felt louder than any revenge anthem could play. My phone erupted almost instantly, vibrating so violently it skittered against the wood. First Belle, then Russell, then an unknown number, probably legal, scrambling to stitch a corpse back together. I let them ring, one after another, their desperation stacking like falling dominoes. On the fifth attempt, I answered. Russell's voice tore through the line, raw with panic. Camille, listen to me. This isn't the time for games. We're live with investors. The press. Everything is on the line. Just authorize the system. We'll triple your salary. Name your number. His words battered the air, frantic, feral. For years, he'd spoken to me like a footnote. Now his empire dangled by a single thread, and I held the scissors. Before I could respond, another sound fractured the chaos, Belle sobbing somewhere in the background. Her voice cracked like porcelain dropped on marble. Camille, please. Please, they're blaming me. I closed my eyes. And for a heartbeat, I felt nothing. No rage, no pity, just the clean, glacial stillness of someone who'd already chosen. When I spoke, my voice was soft, almost tender. You erased me. Now the system erased you. A silence followed, thick, stunned, before the line exploded with shouts. I ended the call mid-plea and set the phone face down. The storm could rage without me. I reached for my laptop again, and that's when the headline flashed across the Bloomberg ticker in real time. Halverson Dynamics stock plunges 18% after catastrophic Neuralink failure. I stared at the screen, an exhale unspooling from somewhere deep, hollowed by years of swallowing words. The sound wasn't laughter. It wasn't even joy. It was something sharper, cleaner, a release I'd been owed for decades. I folded the laptop shut, slid it into my bag, and stood. The cafe was warm, the night outside colder. But for the first time since 9:04 this morning, I wasn't. The countdown had ended. My silence had spoken. And the empire that thought I was obsolete, it just learned the cost of forgetting who built the foundation. The new frontier. Night had settled like velvet over the city, the skyline glittering against an inky sky. From my apartment window, towers blinked like distant stars, their reflections trembling on rain-slicked streets. Far off, the Halverson logo glowed stubbornly in electric blue, a wounded giant pretending it hadn't fallen. Inside, I sat barefoot on the couch, the hum of the city muted behind double glass. My laptop cast a pale halo across the coffee table. On the screen, an email pulsed like a heartbeat. From Lorien Systems. Subject, Chief Systems Officer, name your terms. Body, Camille, your leadership on Neuralink set a new standard. We'd like you to join us in building the next frontier. Full creative control, full protection. I read it once, then again, letting the words unfurl through me like oxygen after drowning. For months, I'd carried weight, bills piling on the counter, sleepless nights, stitching systems they would later claim as theirs. And today, at 9:04 a.m., they tried to erase me with a sentence. Now, my name was the only sentence that mattered. I clicked reply. For a breath, I hesitated, not out of fear, but reverence for this moment. Then my fingers moved, steady and unshaken. Thank you. Let's discuss tomorrow. 9 a.m. works. Send. The sound was soft, almost nothing, but it felt like a door slamming shut and another swinging wide into light. My life didn't collapse with Halverson's stock. It shifted clean, precise, like code executed without error. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling while the laptop screen dimmed. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about deadlines or board meetings. I was thinking about choice. Mine. The phone buzzed. I glanced down, expecting Lorien again. But the notification wasn't an email. It was a social post, fresh and smug, Belle Halverson right. Her caption read, "Innovation has a price." The irony almost made me laugh. I tapped the photo. She looked brittle under the harsh lights of failure. Smile stretched, eyes hollow, as if the sentence was a shield too thin to stop the bleeding. Maybe she thought those words sounded profound, like a manifesto. But to me, they read like a confession carved on the ruins she built. I whispered into the quiet, each syllable smooth as glass. Yes, 710 million. The number hung in the air like a verdict and a liberation. I turned the phone face down, closed the laptop, and walked to the window. Beyond the glass, the city burned bright and alive. Somewhere out there, Halverson's empire smoldered in silence. And mine was just beginning. When they told me I was outdated, I believed for one brief moment that maybe they were right. But today proves something I want every one of you to remember. They can take your title, your desk, even your paycheck. But they cannot take your value. That's yours. That's untouchable. If you've ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or made to feel invisible, let this be a reminder. You are more powerful than their opinion of you. Sometimes the greatest victories don't happen in boardrooms. They happen in the quiet. When you choose dignity over desperation, when you refuse to break. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice and proving that no one gets to define my worth but me. And neither should they define yours. Now, I want to hear your story. Have you ever been in a situation where someone doubted you and you turned that doubt into strength? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one because your voice matters here. If this story hit home for you, do me one small favor. Tap that like button. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that they're stronger than the storm they're in. And if you want more stories that pull back the curtain on power, betrayal, and resilience, make sure you subscribe. There's so much more coming, and I'd love for you to be here when it does. Your story isn't over. It's just waiting for the page where you take back the pen.